You're walking with a taxi driver today. We like to try and do a tribute to the Leeds Pals, who were wiped out in 1916 at the Battle of the Somme. September 1914. The Leeds Pals disembark at Masham railway station. In front of them there is a 7-mile walk to their training camp in Colsterdale. They were slowly moulded into a fighting battalion. This will probably be the first look at the home as they marched up the hill to what was to be their camp. This farm will have still been there then days. As they walked, they must have been taking in everything that was around them, and to come from the city to a remote, haunting but beautiful place like this must have been a shock to the system. Then marched past this Wesleyan Chapel. It was built in 1911. On our way up, we stop at the monument and take a close look. This cairn was erected by the survivors and relatives and friends of the 15th Battalion West Yorkshire Regiment, Leeds Pals, to mark the site of the first camp, September 1914, and is dedicated to all who served in the battalion. Unveiled September 28th, 1935. We'd like to dedicate this walk to their memory and try and tell the story of the Pals as we walk. So if anybody stops at this memorial, they can see the countryside the Pals lived in. They don't know it yet, but this is the start of their long walk to the Somme. We're heading up towards Springhouse now, and then turn right, then left up towards on the coal road. This is an easy one to follow, so I'm not going to talk too much about the walk and try and talk about the Pals. We head forward now. Walk up the hill towards the gated road, and at the T-junction turn right down the hill towards the farm. Walk down the track round the back of the farm and just keep heading forward. I don't think this will have changed much since the Pals were here. We walk to the left-hand side of the farm. We've just passed Spout House and we're heading towards the River Burn. Cross over the old stream bed and then turn right up through the trees. Head forward along the track. You'll start heading downhill slightly now. You'll see a house on your right, a gate in front of you. Go straight through the gate. Follow the wall down 100 yards and there's a gate on your left hand side with a track. We turn left through the gate and follow the track, and we stop on that track now until we say otherwise. And straight away you're walking uphill slightly. The Battle of the Somme started July the 1st, 1916. It lasted until November. For many people, the Battle of the Somme was the battle that seemed to epitomise the futility of trench warfare. The Pals were part of Kitchener's volunteer army, persuaded to volunteer by posters showing Lord Kitchener himself summoning men to arms to show their patriotism. Fearless to a man, the Pals enlisted with their hearts full of pride. The battle started with a week-long artillery bombardment of the German lines. 1,738,000 shells were fired at the Germans. The logic behind this was so that the artillery guns would destroy the barbed wire placed in front of the German trenches. The Germans retreated into their dugouts, some of them 40 feet deep. As a barrage from the British artillery rained overhead, they just sat and waited. But as the guns fell silent and the attack began, they emerged from their trenches and their machine guns wreaked havoc through the Pals. As they went over the top, they were told to keep in formation and walk. To a man, they held their nerve and bravely walked forward. One by one, as the German guns took the toll, the Pals fell. Bodies twisted and smashed as the German artillery opened fire. Among the casualties, some had lost limbs and some were never recovered. Some of the Pals were blown to bits as the shells exploded around them. The name lives on in Colsterdale at the memorial. By the end of the battle in November 1916, the British had lost 420,000 men. Lord Kitchener was a supporter of the theory of attrition, that eventually you would grind your enemy down. However, it did have dire political and social consequences in Britain. Many spoke of a lost generation. Private George Harold Mortimer, born Armley, Leeds, 1891. Killed in action 1st of July 1916, aged 25. When the Pals left the trenches on the 1st of July 1916, George Mortimer was killed after advancing only a few yards towards the enemy. Private Robert Redhead, born Lancaster 1897. Private Thomas Redhead, born Lancaster 1895. Both brothers enlisted at Colsterdale in November 1914 and were given consecutive army numbers. They served with the Pals at Colsterdale, Egypt and France. Shortly before the Battle of the Somme, Robert was posted to the 11th Battalion. He was killed in action 1st to the 7th, 1916. Thomas, still with the Pals, was severely wounded on the same day, and after hospital treatment was posted to the Labour Corps, with whom he served the rest of the war. Corporal Arthur Meeson, born July the 21st, 1892. When the Pals tram toured Leeds, he was among the first to volunteer and enlisted on the 5th of September 1914. After training at Colsterdale and seeing service in Egypt and France, he was later killed in action along with so many of his pals on the morning of the 1st of July, aged 23 years. Second Lieutenant Thomas Humphreys, born Bradford, Yorkshire, 1897. He'd only been with the Pals for 3 weeks when on the 1st of July he was killed leading his men in the attack on the Sur village, Battle of the Somme. Brave to a man, they pushed forward until they were almost wiped out. The next morning they surveyed the dreadful scene in front of them. It became clear that the Germans always had a commanding view of no man's land. The British attack had been brutally repulsed. Hundreds of dead were strung out like wreckage washed up on high water mark. As many died on the enemy wire as on the ground, like fish caught in the net. They hung there in grotesque postures. Some looked as if they were praying. They had died on their knees, and the wire had prevented their fall. Machine gun fire had done its terrible work. George Coppard, machine gunner at the Battle of the Somme. In the course of the battle, 51 Victoria Crosses were won by British soldiers. Private Frederick Richard Lewis, born 1894, Hunslet, Leeds. Private Lewis was to serve with the Pals at Colsterdale, Egypt and France. On the 1st of July, Frederick was severely wounded, and a couple of days later he found himself on a hospital ship bound for home. On the 5th of July 1916, while on board the ship bound for Britain, he died of his wounds. You walk downhill now about 100 yards, you see the farm on the right, cross over the bridge, up the hill, and onto the no-through road at the other side. Private Second Lieutenant James Thompson Hall, born Manchester, 1893. He enlisted with the Pals in September 1914 and was made corporal. He served with the Pals in Colsterdale, Egypt and France, and after 2.5 years was sent to Officer Cadet School. He'd only been in France for 2 weeks when he was wounded and taken to a military hospital. He died of his wounds, aged 24. Private Wilfred Joy, born Leeds, 1897. Private Walter Joy, born Leeds, 1897. After training at Colsterdale, they saw service in Egypt and France. They went over the top together and both survived, although Walter was wounded and after recovering was posted to the 1st Battalion, West Yorks. Wilfred stayed with the Pals. They were both killed in action within a few weeks of each other. Walter on the 16th of April 1917 and Wilfred on the 3rd of May 1917. They were aged 21. Private Norman Gibson, born Batley, Yorkshire, 1897. He survived all the major battles the Pals were involved in, but was killed in action a few months before the war ended. At the time, The Pals were in the front line fighting alongside the French. He was killed by a high explosive shell. The award for bravery of the French Croix de Guerre is the only one awarded to a private soldier in the whole of the battalion. The details of this unique award were published in the London Gazette on the 30th of April 1918, 8 days after his death. He was aged 21. We turn right in front of the farmhouse and we follow the road back. Corporal Arthur Jackson, born 1891, St Clement's, Leeds. He served alongside other Farnley men, John Hill, John Doughty, Wilfred Sewell, William McNeill, who had all joined the Pals around the same time. On the 1st of July 1916, when the Pals attacked Sierre, Corporal Jackson was severely wounded and evacuated to Beckett Park Hospital, Leeds. He died of his wounds almost 3 weeks later and was buried in Leeds General Cemetery. He was aged 25. Private Second Lieutenant Leonard Foster, born 1889, Long Preston. On the 9th of October 1915, Leonard married his sweetheart, Martha Avery Hill. In December 1915, 2 months after his marriage, Leonard set sail for Egypt with his pals, never to see his bride again. On July the 8th, 1916, the Yorkshire Evening Post reported, Second Lieutenant Leonard Foster is the latest of the Pals officers who is announced to have been wounded. He is in hospital in France. Leonard's wounds were so severe that he was transferred to the Empire Hospital in London. He died from these wounds on the 13th of August 1916. Private John Richard Hill, born 1897, Farnley, Leeds. He joined the Pals shortly before recruiting closed and was posted to D Company. After the Pals attacked the Sierre on 1st of 7th 1916, his parents were notified that he was missing in action. His parents did not receive confirmation of John's death until early 1917. This was the time the Germans had evacuated the old British front line. The Pals took time out to look for the remains of their missing comrades. John was aged 22. Lieutenant John Paxman Everett, born London 1897. On the 14th of December 1914, at the age of 17, he accepted a commission in the 10th Battalion King's Own Regiment, Light Infantry. On the 12th of June, he was posted to the West Yorkshire Regiment as a second lieutenant and given command of 14 Platoon D Company Leeds Pals. He was killed in action leading his men over the top on the 1st of July during the Battle of the Somme. Private William Cresswell Davis, born Brecon, Wales. He enlisted with the Pals alongside many other Leeds Modern School old boys. After service in Colsterdale, Egypt and France, as a platoon bomber, he was killed within the first few minutes of the attack. The most senior old boy who fell in action, aged 40, no known grave. Private Charles Galloway Greaves, born September 1892, Pudsey, Leeds. Working as a van man at the time of his enlistment with the Pals in September 1914, he trained at Colsterdale in North Yorkshire. He saw service in Egypt and France, like many of his fellow Pals. He was killed in action during the Battle of the Somme, 1st of July 1916. His only son was 1 year old when his father was killed and served with the British Army during the Second World War. Private Thomas Beaumont, born Leeds, 1899. In early 1916, Thomas was sent on a machine gun instruction course and afterwards placed with the Pals machine gun section. On the 1st of July, when the Pals attacked Sierre, he was wounded and hospitalised in France. In December 1916, after recovering from his wounds, he was transferred to the 35th Battalion of the newly formed Machine Gun Corps, serving with the unit until March 1918, when he was listed as missing, later confirmed killed in action, no known grave. He died aged 19. Private Arthur Edwin Fillingham, born Leeds, 1896. On the outbreak of war, he joined the Leeds Pals battalion and trained as a platoon bomber He served in Colsterdale, Egypt and France. Wounded on the 1st of May 1916, he returned to the battalion in time to take part in the July offensive, and like so many pals, was reported killed in action. He'd no known grave, aged just 20. At the telephone box, turn right, over the bridge, and we'll get you back to the memorial. It's been an honour today to do this walk in memory of the Leeds Pals. We've done this walk to the best of our ability, the taxi driver, and we'd just like to take you now on one last look round the camp. So now we cross over the bridge and turn left. Breary Banks in Colsterdale was owned by the Waterworks Department. This included a few huts used by the workmen and a small bungalow used by the Waterworks officials, later to be used as officer accommodation. The water supply to the site was so inadequate that for some time the men would have to wash and shave in a small stream, which ran 200 yards below the camp, inappropriately named the River Burn. The tents required to house the rest of the men would be erected by the advance party. Arthur Meeson, a council employee, was one of them. Walk across the front of the buildings, and as the ground slopes down towards the wood at the bottom, you'll go through the gate. Life under canvas would not be permanent. Huts would soon be built with latrines, bathhouses and all the necessary accommodation that would enable the battalion to live as comfortable as possible up in Colsterdale. The time spent at Colsterdale was for most the best time of their lives. Carefree days with good food, good accommodation and good company. As you walk uphill, you'll see a brick barn in the distance. When materials started arriving for the construction of more solid accommodation, recruits with the necessary backgrounds were employed on the hut building. Men with country backgrounds were soon catching rabbits. They were so abundant around Colsterdale, enabling the battalion cooks to serve up regular meals of rabbit stew. So regular that one pal, Walter Astle, on returning home after the war, refused to eat rabbit for the rest of his life. In late June 1915, the Pals moved to North Camp at Ripon along with the 1st and 2nd Bradford Pals and the 18th DLI for brigade training, then down to Favant overseas to Egypt. If we look close up there, we can see the bases there where the huts have been. They're more or less one on top of another, and this is what's left, and this is how it looks today. I'm stood inside the old camp now, and this is all that's left of some of the buildings. And I hope today we've just given you a tiny little, or we can give you a tiny little flavour of what it must have been like leaving home in Leeds and coming what must have been, seemed like a lifetime away. From the city to the country. It's a cold and windy day today, like it will have been all those years ago. And I wonder if this just gave them just a slight taste of what they had to come in front of, and faced it like men. They were proud to fight for king and country. They died slaughtered in the mud. I hope a few of you will do this walk to the Pals, and it'll let you see, with such beautiful countryside as this, that even though it'll be cold and miserable some days, other days the sun will have shone, and you know, it wasn't a bad place to train really. They laughed together, sang together, lived together, fought together and died together. They were pals. They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning we will remember them.